Hong Kong, the Pearl of the Orient, is in entrenched political and social turmoil. The people of Hong Kong demand a political solution to a package of problems, including the lack of universal suffrage. Yet, there underlies an equally, if not more, impactful source of the unrest, and it is an economic one. It was not exactly obvious. Before the unrest, Hong Kong's economy was booming. The average salary has been steadily growing, the unemployment rate was barely 3%, there was little trace of economic hardship on the surface. But as we have learned in this class, the difficulties of the people in the lower echelon of the social ladder has less to do with their income, but more with their properties. And the housing crisis in Hong Kong has become so entrenched that it almost seemed to be the normality. In the city of Hong Kong, home ownership rate has reached its lowest point since the beginning of the century, 49.2%. And it has been steadily declining since 2012. By contrast, the same index of Singapore, a city-state of similar size, is staggeringly 91.2%. Although the housing market and the political system in the two cities are drastically different, the jaw-dropping contrast does point out extremely lack of accessible housing in Hong Kong. According to The Economist, the average Hong Kong salary is less than $2,200 a month, hardly more than the average rent. And it is not only imposing burdens to the working class, but the struggling middle class as well. The average first-year salary of a graduate from Hong Kong University, one of the finest universities in East Asia, is the equivalent of the price of a bare 100 square foot in an average apartment. Considering the high cost of living in the city of Hong Kong, which is caused by high property prices to some extent, it is simply an impossible mission for the vast majority of young college graduates to own a property in the foreseeable future, as most of the income flows directly to the pockets of the landlords. So what is the root of the housing problem in Hong Kong? The simple answer is the lack of land, but the complete story is much more complex than that, involving geographical, historical, political, and economic factors. Firstly, unlike mostly flat Singapore, Hong Kong is composed of mountainous islands and peninsulas, which poses great civil engineering difficulties for constructors and results in a natural scarcity of land. Secondly, among the land that could be used for housing or commercial development, a disproportionate part is reserved for village-type development, a policy whose origin can be traced all the way back to the beginning of the British colonial rule of Hong Kong. In the vast rural and relatively less developed areas of Hong Kong, the New Territories, each male descendant of the original villagers who resisted British occupation is entitled to a piece of land to construct his own house. This policy was installed by the British colonial government to appease the villagers. Apparently, such a policy has become outdated and very detrimental to the Hong Kong housing market. In 2013, among the 3,300 acres of unleased government land, 23,000 are reserved for village-type development, and less than 1,000 are zoned as residential land. Thirdly, the colonial history of Hong Kong effectively gave its government a monopoly over land supply, who decides when and to whom any land is released. And the way it decides is rather capitalist. Whoever has the highest bid takes the land. The constructors who win the bid, therefore, are incentivized and forced to build properties with astronomical price tag. As Hong Kong has one of the lowest corporate taxes and the absence of many common taxes, including estate tax, sales tax, and value-added tax, land sale has become the major source of government revenue, taking as much as 29% in 2017. Thus, there exists few incentives for the government to change its land policies. And lastly, as a result of the said policies, a handful of large constructors dominate the supply side of Hong Kong's housing market. In fact, each of them possesses a sizable land bank so that they make construction decisions independent of new government land releases. That is, even if the Hong Kong government increased their supply drastically and consistently, the large constructors would still keep the housing supply low to maximize their profits, according to research done by the Chinese University of Hong Kong and University of Macau. Where is the way out then? Many Hong Kongers aspire to the public housing system of Singapore, yet it is not suitable for Hong Kong for a multitude of reasons. Apart from the geographical differences, The execution of the Singaporean model required a forceful, even relatively undemocratic government and heavy contributions from its citizens. Since the Parliament of Hong Kong consistently failed to elevate taxes in the past 5 decades, a tax high enough to support a massive public housing project is unlikely to receive sufficient public support, and a government forceful to its citizens would also face strong resentment from Hong Kongers. Ultimately, the Hong Kong government must completely re-engineer its land policies within the current boundary of its power, to break up the construction giants, abolish the outdated village-type development practices, and potentially return the ownership of the land to all of its citizens. Heading into the 5th month of citywide anti-government protest, one cannot help but to remain pessimistic about Hong Kong's government's ability to resolve any crisis, including the one of housing. The world would have to wait and see when the will of the people can finally triumph.